Okay. Hello. First, I'd like to thank the International Association for Mathematical Geosciences for awarding me the Felix Chayes Prize. I feel very honored and excited to receive this award. As a person who loved mathematics since I was a child, receiving a prize for the honor of my work in mathematical geoscience is very special and rewarding to me. I also like to thank Dr. Robert Hazen for his support and for introducing me to data-driven discovery in mineralogy. I also like to thank the rest of my research group and for my collaborators. It's a different time right now, having a virtual conference with everybody sitting at home or in their offices, joining via Zoom instead of gathering together in a beautiful location. So I would like to, with so many experience restricted travel, I would like to introduce myself with a photo of a place that's very important to me. So this is from near my parents' lake home in Western Norway. I'm Norwegian, but I've been living in the United States for many, many years. And I'm very excited that my family from Norway and my friends from Norway could actually join me here today on Zoom, which is kind of different when you have a conference, but today they can actually join me. I did my PhD at the University of Arizona, where I worked on the correlation functions for the two-dimensional periodic easing model, which is a model in statistical mechanics. The model can explain phenomena like phase transition. And you see an example of phase transition for quartz here on the slides here. After my PhD, I started to work more in applied statistics, and I got an opportunity to work with a group of mineralogists doing the statistical analysis. And my talk today is going to be about that collaboration. I'm going to first spend a few minutes introducing mineral evolution in order to provide some background for why I was brought into this research group doing the mathematical and statistical analysis. Some of the great questions posed by mankind are related to our place in the cosmos. Are we on Earth unique, or does life exist elsewhere? A pervasive theme in planetary sciences and astrobiology is a search for Earth-like planet. However, a comprehensive definition of Earth-like remains elusive. A planet is identical to Earth. What does that even mean? NASA has been spending $1 billion on the mission to Mars to see if Mars has been habitable enough to be Earth-like. Kepler spacecraft was launched by NASA in 2009 to search for Earth-sized planet orbiting other stars. So it turns out that some of these big questions become statistical because there are billions and billions of planets out there, but we can only sampling a few. It has become more and more important in sciences to collaborate across disciplines. So I work with mineralogists, earth scientists, computer scientists, astrophysicists, and I'm a mathematician to work on these big questions in the earth sciences. The group's research focuses on the fundamental questions related to the origin of life in the perspective of planetary evolution, with the premise that the origins of life required a sequence of chemical reactions. And they inquired about the physical, chemical, and biological characteristic that influence the evolution and habitability on planets. And currently, we are characterizing Earth in terms of mineral evolution and mineral ecology. And I'm applying statistics to the analysis of deep time events that relate to the coevolution of the geosphere and the biosphere. Data-driven discovery in mineralogy is a new area made possible by the large and growing data resources on minerals and also on petrochemical and mineralogy. We have large growing data resources on mineral diversity, mineral distribution, and mineral properties. And by integrating the various deep time data on mineralogy with the geochemical and petrological data, as well as the contrasting mineralogy of planets and moon, we hope to get a more complete picture of the coevolution of the geosphere and the biosphere. The open access mineralogical data resources has made it possible to obtain quantitative methods, to apply quantitative methods in mineralogy. And I'm going to show you some examples of that in this talk today. So we used data-driven discovery, like in the field of mineral evolution, mineral ecology, mineral network analysis, and also for the classification of silicon carbon grades from the meteorites to understand their stellar evolution. So I'm going to focus on my talk today on mineral ecology, but I also will briefly introduce mineral evolution, and I will show you one example from mineral network analysis, and also for the classification of silicon carbon grains. For a few years ago, Dr. Robert Hystad at the Earths and Planets Laboratory at the Carnegie Institution for Sciences, he had a statistical problem he approached me with. His question was, if he replenished Earth's history or explored another Earth-like planet and discovered approximately 4,831 minerals anew, which was the number of minerals we had at that time, how many mineral species would be different? So I thought that was kind of an interesting problem. So I decided to kind of think about this and work on this. And that's kind of how I kind of got into this research group. So I'm going to return to this question later today. Mineral evolution is a study for how minerals has evolved over a period of 4.5 billion years through a combination of chemical, physical, and biological processes. So minerals has evolved through at least 10 stages. And the whole thing starts with a supernova. Supernova is an explosion of a star. It's a large explosion that takes place in space. So chemical elements fused into make the entire periodic table, and after that, the minerals were formed. And what do you think was the first mineral species formed? The first mineral species formed was diamonds. And actually, a dozen newer minerals formed as microcrystals for temperature about 1,500 Celsius degrees, like silicon carbide, for example. And I'm going to return to the silicon carbide grain a little bit later today. And they correspond to the following elements in the periodic table. So a mineral species is characterized by its crystal structure and its chemical composition. So for example, about 4.56 billion years ago, you had like 60 mineral species in solar nebula. While for 3 billion years ago, Earth's chemical and physical processes gave up to 1,500 different mineral species. The question is, how did we get to almost 6,000 mineral species we see on Earth today? And the answer to this question is life. In 2008, Dr. Hystad and his collaborator had a groundbreaking paper to the American mineralogist where they proposed that about 2/3 of all known mineral species are a result of biological activity. So why is that? Well, for 2.5 to 2.2 billion years ago, we had the great oxidation event that caused the oxygen in the atmosphere to arise because of the photosynthesis of cyanobacteria. And that caused dramatic changes in Earth's near redox state, and it caused the formations of thousands of new mineral species. So it turns out that Earth's mineralogy has evolved in parallel with biology. Hence, you have the co-evolution of the geosphere and the biosphere. One implication of this finding is that the mineralogy of other planets and moon has the potential to review biological influences beyond Earth. The National Research Council in 2008 identified the co-evolution of the geosphere and the biosphere as one of the 10 major research questions for the 21st century Earth sciences. Mineral ecology is a study for the diversity and distribution of mineral species on Earth and other terrestrial planets. So right now we have found about almost 6,000 mineral species. But when I did this study, we had data on 4,831 mineral species coming from 150,000 localities. So localities are a place on Earth where the minerals are found, and 652,000 unique combinations of mineral species and localities. So that's our sample size. I want to say a little bit about those two data resources we have here. Min.org was created by Jolene Rolfe as a private database in 1993. It has since expanded to become the world's largest database where all the mineral species and the localities. It's a crowdsourced database currently maintained by the Hystad Institute of Mineralogy. The RUF database was created by Robert Downs at the University of Arizona. This database is an open access repository for all the known mineral species. It has like the chemical composition, crystal structures, and the Raman spectra. And if I click on this link here, let's see if that works. You can see, let me actually show you this database. So it looks like this. All right. Oops. I think hold on a second, my presentation suddenly disappeared when I clicked on this link. Let me go back to it. All right, can you guys see this again?
Not yet, Grethe.
Oh, let's see. I'll go back to, I don't know what happened here. Try again. All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
I tried to make it into, oh, here we go. Let me go back to where I was. I'm sorry about that. I don't think I should click on any links in my presentation. All right. All right. This database has a little bit interesting story. I don't know if you know who Michael Scott is, but Michael Scott was the first CEO of Apple Computers. And he's also a mineral collector, and he wanted to build a database over all the mineral species. So he decided to fund Robert Downs. He gave him $4 million to build this database. However, he had one requirement for the database, and his requirement was that they name the database after his cat. And the name of his cat was Roof, so that's why it's called the Roof database. When I got this data, they had just organized the data from min.org, and no one had looked at the distribution of mineral species on Earth before. So the first thing I did, I took the mineral species and I ranked them according to the frequencies. So the frequencies are the number of observed localities. So for example, quartz is ranked number 1 because it's found at the greatest number of localities. So if you're looking at this distribution, you see that it's a very right skew distribution with a very long, heavy tail. To the right here, these are the rare mineral species. These are species that found maybe once or twice in nature. So the first thing I did, I want to group the mineral species into their frequency classes. So we get this graph. So we have 22% of all mineral species are found in only one locality, 12% are found at 2 localities, and actually half of all mineral species are found at 5 or fewer localities. Hystad and Bob Downside, I'm named after those 2 of my collaborators I mentioned earlier. So the first thing I wanted to do was to come up with a statistical model for the frequency distribution of mineral species on Earth. And then I want to use the model to estimate the total number of distinct mineral species in Earth's crust. I'm going to talk about that from a Bayesian framework using Markov-Chain Monte Carlo simulations. And then I want to use the model to characterize Earth-like planets from the perspective of mineralogy. Estimating number of biological species in an ecological population was first pioneered by Fisher in 1943, where he estimated the number of distinct Malayan butterflies. In microbiology, they are also concerned with the estimating number of taxa in a microbial population. And there's several different approaches you can take to estimate the number of species. One of the difficulties with estimating the number of species is that the law of large number do not hold. The law of large number says that your relative sample frequencies will approach the population probabilities in probability as your sample size goes to infinity. And the relative sample frequencies will add up to unity. The problem is that you cannot sample every type of species in the population, since there are some species that have an extremely low probability of occurring. So your sample relative frequencies will overestimate your population probabilities. The solution is to use a population model formulated in terms of a type distribution that takes into account the number of unobserved species in the population. So I'm going to use a large number of rare and small. I'm going to briefly introduce some notation and some of the statistics. S is the population size. S is a total number of distinct mineral species in Earth's crust. So you want to estimate S. You assume that each mineral species has a relative abundance pi of being sampled at an arbitrary locality, where this defines the ordering schemes. And since they're probable, they're going to add up to being 1. Pi is given by x over m, where x is the number of localities for each species in the population. M is the total population size. M is the size you need to have in order to collect every single distinct mineral species. So M is an unknown quantity. Going from population abundance to sample abundance, doing a change of variable, the probability that the species will occur at j localities in a sample n mineral species locality pairs is given by the F mixed Poisson distribution, where F is a probability density function, and where lambda is x times v, which can be written as n times pi, is a mean number of observed species for the sampling frequency V is equal to N over M, where the parameter theta is a function of the sampling frequency V. So the fact that theta is a function of your sample size can be used to create like a species accumulation curve. The mineral distribution displays strong overdispersion, which means that the variance is larger than the mean because we have heterogeneity in the population. As the amount of variability is larger than can be expected under a Poisson model, the F-mixed Poisson distribution offers more flexibility by allowing for variability in the parameter lambda. So we assume that the observed number of localities comes from a Poisson distribution with mean lambda, where the unknown quantity lambda itself comes from the mixing distribution F. So theta is a parameter we need to estimate. Since I'm working in a Bayesian framework, we need to calculate the posterior distribution of S in the nuisance parameter theta, which is proportional to the likelihood function times the prior distribution. It's a result by Barger and Bunge that for any distribution where S is an integer and theta is a real number, you can split this prior into two parts like this. So these are independent. The likelihood function, which is a multinomial with the product of this p, or the p's are your probabilities, invoking also the unobserved species, can be split into two parts, where the first part is your binomial likelihood for the observed number of species, with the success probability being 1 minus p of 0. The second part is your multinomial likelihood for the observed frequencies, with the zero truncated F-mixed Poisson distribution as your probabilities. And there's several choices you can use for p. The one that worked for, if I were to model all the mineral species, the Poisson log normal distribution provided the best fit. If I were to model some of the subsets according to chemical composition, sometimes the generalized inverse Gauss-Poisson provided a better fit, other times the Poisson inverse Gaussian provided a better fit. I used the deviance information criteria to compare the model, and the model with the smallest DIC provides the best fit. For a prior distribution, I used the uniform distribution. I also tried to use a simplified version of the reference prior, and they gave about the same fit. Here, the turns out that the posterior distribution is like dominated by the likelihood function. Then I simulated the samples from the joint posterior distribution for the population parameter S and the nuisance parameter theta by using a random walk metropolis algorithm. Posterior quantities or interest can then be calculated from the approximation of the samples. I used the normal distribution as my proposal distribution, where I set the mean to the current value and I adjusted the standard deviation to achieve a certain acceptance rate. So I used like 44%. And I simulated, from 3 change for starting values. You have to, of course, you have to check if you have convergence of the change and mixing on the change. Discarded half for the iteration, and I picked up every 500 iteration in order to reduce the autocorrelation. So let me just show you some results. So the expected number of mineral species can then be calculated from the binomial distribution, where the mean is S times 1 minus P, where P is your mix, the F-mixed Poisson distribution, computed in terms of rescaled parameters and for different sample sizes. So here you see the expected number of mineral species as a function of the sampling size. As S goes to as the sample size N goes to infinity, we predict that there are 9,308 distinct mineral species on Earth today, which means you have like 4,477 mineral species that are yet to be discovered. So we can also see some of the calculations over here. Here's another picture. The gray bar plot is the observed number of species as a function of the frequency class. So for example, we have 1,060 mineral species found at one locality. The blue dots, these are your expected or your fitted fitted values, which is given by S times P of J of theta. So we see a relatively good fit here. Another thing we calculated was how many carbon mineral species do they yet to be found. And I predicted there are 145 undiscovered carbon mineral species. And that discovery led to the Carbon Mineral Challenge that ran from 2016 to 2019. That challenge was sponsored by Deep Carbon Observatory under the lead of Dr. Daniel Hammer at Southern Illinois University. And the purpose of the challenge was for the public to discover the remaining carbon mineral species. And it actually led to the discovery of more than 30 new carbon mineral species. And you can read about, if you're interested, you can read about it on this link on the side here. A hot topic right now in astrobiology is the search for Earth-like planets. And what characterizes an Earth-like planet? And we have been interested in this question from the perspective of mineral diversity and mineral distribution. And I've been trying to use statistics to see if I can shed some light to that question. The number of mineral species in the population with probability greater than or equal to rho can be approximated by this continuous function, where G is a type density function, which is F over pi. F is your log normal distribution. And if you integrate this function G here from 0 to 1, you will get all the distinct number of mineral species. These rows are constructed such that I have one mineral species between each of these. So I want to calculate these rows. So I want to solve this equation here for each k. K goes from 1 to s. And I can solve this numerically using like a Newton-Raphson method. And then define f of p rho from rho to 1 times p times g. So this is going to actually be your log normal distribution, which we have over here. The relative abundances are then given by these equations here. Using the relative abundances, we can calculate the occurrence probability for each of the 9,308 mineral species in a random sample of size 652,000 mineral species locality pairs, which is the sample size we had at that time from the crust of the Earth, using the binomial distribution. And then we get the following curve. So this curve shows you the probability that each of the mineral species, including the one we haven't even found yet, that the probability that each of these will occur at least one time in a random sample of size n versus the population rank. So what you're seeing here is that there are like about 2,000 mineral species that are likely to occur on all Earth-like planets. So these are probably the mineral species you're seeing on Earth today. These are the rock-forming mineral species that are formed from the most abundant crystal chemical elements like oxygen, silicon, calcium, carbon, and magnesium, for example. And these are mineral species that by necessity is going to have to exist on Earth-like planets. We anticipate that other terrestrial planets are going to have a similar distribution of these rock-forming mineral species. However, chance also plays an important role in diversity mineral distribution, especially for the rare mineral species that are found maybe once or twice in nature, or maybe we haven't even found them yet. So these are mineral species that occur purely by chance event. And then we have like in the middle, we have these more intermediate probabilities. So we're kind of looking at the interplay between chance and necessity. In 2017, Robert Hazen and his collaborator received a grant from the John Templeton Foundation. And the title of the grant was Chance, Necessity, and the Origin of Life, where they kind of study these types of relationship. Another calculation we did, we calculated what is the probability of replicating Earth's mineralogy. And we found this probability to be so low that we have concluded that Earth is mineralogically unique. All right. Let's go back to Hazen's question. If you replace Earth history or explore another Earth-like planet and discovered approximately 4,831 minerals anew, how many mineral species would be different? So now I can simulate two random sample using the multinomial distribution, sample size 652,000 mineral species, using these relative abundances we calculated as the marginal distribution. And then we can calculate and then pick the first 4,831 minerals. Then we can calculate how many of the species will be different. So I found that 16% of the mineral species will be different distributed over those two samples. Keep in mind that this number is a lower bound because this calculation assumes that these two words under consideration are completely identical in any aspect, like for example, in mineral forming, environment, and stuff like that. So Also studies, however, studies of the bulk composition of terrestrial planets are very different. Hystad also estimated that there should be about 15,000 plasma mineral species that could be formed from the 72 essential mineral forming chemical elements, which are not assumed to be in those 9,300 mineral species we see on Earth today. Because a lot of these mineral species are formed in very neutral chemical and physical environment. So that two planets should have the same mineral species is unlikely because a lot of the species are formed by chance event. So we expect this number to be higher than 16%. So these are some of the previous work we have done in mineral ecology. A new approach right now is to represent the distribution of mineral species in rocks and ore deposit by mineral network diagram. Shauna Morrison at the Carnegie Institution for Sciences, she had in 2017 the first paper we are aware of where she represented mineral species by mineral network diagram. Her paper was very popular. It generated press releases from 140 media outlets in 13 languages from 36 countries with an estimated 200 million reads. Here's a figure from her paper. This is a network diagram of chroma minerals sorted by perinetic modes. So perinetic mode is like an environment where the minerals are formed. The minerals are represented by nodes, and you have a link between two mineral species if those mineral species are found at the same locality. The goal is to discover hidden patterns to Earth's near surface and chemical environment, with an emphasis on the crustal oxidation state through deep time. Let me show you a second picture. This shows you a bipartite representation of carbon mineral species, where the nodes are colored. The nodes there, the colored nodes are the carbon minerals, and they're colored according to age of first appearances. The black nodes, these are your localities. So there's a link between a carbon mineral species and the locality if that mineral species is found in that locality. So what you're seeing here is like a timeline of carbon mineral evolution, even though no age data was used to create this graph. In the middle here, these are your common mineral species, and out in the periphery is your rare mineral species. So that it has kind of like a U-form shape. So one thing I started recently to think about is, can we come up with some statistical models for mineral network data, which will provide inference about certain network substructures? Can we apply the models for predicting which minerals are most likely to be found together at future locations? And what attributes do these minerals have? What types of structures characterizing mineral network data, and which configurations are significant? So one model I started to work on is an exponential random graph model, which is from the exponential family, because in that model we can add in different types of configurations. I started working with chroma minerals, but these are still in progress. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I also know that Shauna Morrison at the Carnegie Institution of Sciences and also a group at RPI are working on creating a bipartite representation of all the mineral species with their perinetic mode. They're working on building a mineral evolution database. They're also working with affinity analysis, where they're trying to come up with association rules for the minerals, such that they can say, given a locality, which minerals can we predict exist at these localities. But these are work currently in progress. So that's all I'm going to say about that for now. Hopefully we can be more of that in the future. And the last thing I want to talk about is the presolar silicon carbon grains, which are grains that are formed in explosions in the late stellar evolution. And majority of them are formed in AGB stars, asymptotic giant branch stars. Stefan has compiled a database over at least 17,000 isotope analysis of the silicon carbon grains found in meteorites. And the discovery of these microscopic presolar grains has deepened our understanding of the physical and chemical processes occurring in stars. And isotope data for the presolar silicon carbon grains are used to define the subgroups. So here you see some of the subgroups with presumably different stellar origins. So the isotope data provides like a biosignature for the origins of these grains, for the stellar origins. Recently, Bujar, she did a cluster analysis for the classification of the pre-solar silicon carbon grains in order to understand better the stellar evolution and origin of these grains. In a second paper, which is actually we just got accepted with some modifications, we used consensus clustering in order to evaluate the classification of the pre-solar silicon carbon grains, and also to evaluate the stability of the clusters, and also to come up with the confidence assignment for the clusters. So we used several different techniques, and we also looked at different stability techniques. One technique I looked at was developed by Duduid and Friedland, which is based on bagging. So bagging uses averaging over aggregated clusterings in order to reduce the variability of the clustering algorithm. So each observation was here classified by a majority vote, which means that it's assigned to the cluster for which occurred the most frequently over the bootstrap samples. And then you can use the Hungarian algorithm for the cluster label correspondence problem, which means that you can align the clusters from the bootstraps sample to the reference cluster. And then you can calculate a cluster vote for each observation, which is the proportional times it occurs in this winning cluster assignment, counting for how many times it occurs in the bootstrap samples. So let me show you some results. This graph shows if I use spectral clustering in the consensus framework. These are the clusters plotted with nitrogen versus carbon isotopes. And this one shows the silicon isotopes. The last picture here shows you the grain type, how they're distributed across these clusters. I posted some code on GitHub if you're interested to see the code. What we're seeing here is
almost close to time, Grethe. Just to.
Oh, I'm all to time. Okay. Can I have 1 more minute?
Yeah. Okay.
So we can see that these grains are partitioned into 7 main groups. 2 main groups of AB grains, which is in brown and blue. 3 main groups of MSY grains. 1 main group of Z grains, which you see in Z here. And it's uncertain if the X grain should be split into 2 groups. And the last picture shows you the stable clusters. Each of these observations has a 90% are occurring in its winning cluster assignment more than 90% of the time. So the clusters are very highly stable. So the conclusion, my co-authors on this paper are astrophysicists, and they come up with the following conclusion after I did a statistical analysis. We see how we have a genetic relationship among the MSY and Z grains, as supported by the common origin and low mass asymptotic guiding branch. So the original definition in the literature was based on carbon isotope. We think maybe that could be an arbitrary division. The 2 AB grains are adapted to divide around the solar nitrogen isotope ratio, which points to 2 distinct stellar formation environments. And in the literature by Liu, that was proposed that this AB grain should be split into 2 groups around the solar ratio, and we kind of can confirm this with statistical analysis. The X grains are either divided into 1 group if I'm using spectral clustering in the consensus framework, or 2 groups if you're using model-based method. If I do stability analysis, only 1 of the clusters is stable. So we think the original definition of X grains in the literature should remain. And the nova grains are often clustered with the nova grains, that is grains over here, are often clustered with the X or the 50 nitrogen-rich AB grains, in line with their proposed core collapse of supernova origin. So you see that the highly stable cluster 5 consists mostly of 50 nova-rich AB grains and nova grains. And both types of grains record strong hydrogen-burning isotope signatures at high temperature. So we suggested in the paper that we should investigate the genetic relationship between the nova grains and the 50 nitrogen-rich AB grains. So these are all some examples of where we used data-driven discovery in mineralogy. And I'm very excited to be able to work with so many people across different disciplines. These are my collaborators on the paper related to my talk today. I want to say thank you, and it has been a privilege to speak here today.
Thank you very much, Grethe.
Thank you.
Thank you, and your family and friends from Norway are very welcome as well. We are very close to time to move on to our next speaker, but maybe if you want to stop sharing your screen, Grethe. Yeah. I don't think we've any questions unless there's a very quick question has just come up from Gerald. So how much do these results depend on technical assumptions such as independence of observation of minerals to be identified if present in location, independence, etc.? Do you want to very, very quickly provide some sort of response?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I discuss more of that in my papers. If you go to the papers, we know there are biases in our databases because the data is crowdsourced. And we also know that the data is not 100% independent because we know there are some mineral species that are more likely to be found together in certain locations, like molybdenite species, for example, are found in very restrictive locations. So we know there are biases in our data, but we still felt that we have some results that kind of give us a picture for, for the distribution of mineral species. But we are aware of these biases, and it's discussed a little bit in the papers, these biases.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Grethe. And I think there's a real opportunity to explore what's going to happen in the future with climate change and the development of the minerals. Excellent presentation, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And lovely to see your friends and family as well.
Thank you.